Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Alabama. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. In 1834, the prestigious Thornfield Plantation in Limestone County became the setting for an unspeakable arrangement when Judge Elijah Montgomery elevated Solomon from field laborer to personal attendant. Judge Montgomery, whose formidable reputation preceded him throughout Alabama's legal circles, had acquired Thornfield in 1832 following the unexpected death of his wife Caroline, a tragedy that county records suggest had transformed the once gregarious jurist into a reclusive figure whose public appearances were limited strictly to his judicial duties. His distinguished career on the bench had cultivated powerful connections extending to Montgomery and even Washington, with correspondence discovered in the state archives revealing communications between the judge and several prominent senators regarding judicial appointments and territorial disputes. These political alliances rendered him nearly untouchable within local society, allowing practices that might otherwise have drawn scrutiny to continue unquestioned behind Thornfield's imposing facade of whitewashed columns and meticulously maintained gardens. A financial ledger recovered during an 1899 courthouse renovation documented Montgomery's considerable wealth, assets exceeding those of any other landowner in the county, including investments in railroads, cotton processing facilities, and an unusually large sum allocated for staff maintenance and discipline that exceeded standard expenditures by nearly threefold. Most revealing among historical documents was a letter dated September 1833, authored by neighboring plantation owner Thomas Whitfield, addressed to his brother in Virginia, expressing discomfort after a visit to Thornfield. Montgomery's peculiar management methods with his people disturbs me greatly. There is something unnatural in the silence that pervades his household, and in the manner his servants attend him, particularly the young man he keeps in such proximity. I shall not be accepting further invitations to dine at Thornfield, as I cannot shake the sensation of witnessing something improper beneath the veneer of his hospitality. This correspondence, discovered tucked between the pages of a family Bible during a 1971 estate sale, provides the first documented indication that something deeply troubling had taken root within the walls of Thornfield Plantation under Judge Montgomery's exacting authority. The paper trail documenting Solomon's acquisition begins with a yellowed bill of sale from the Charleston Maritime Auction House, dated the 7th of November 1833, preserved among Montgomery's personal effects in a leather portfolio discovered during the 1967 renovation of Thornfield's study. The document describes Solomon as male, approximately 24 years of age, exceptional physical condition, no visible scarring, educated in carpentry and stable management, though notably absent was any mention of his literacy, a skill Solomon had painstakingly acquired in secret while previously owned by a Charleston physician whose young daughter had taught him to read medical texts. According to the auctioneer's record book, obtained from his descendants in 1981 by the Alabama Historical Society, Montgomery had traveled specifically to Charleston after corresponding with the auction house regarding particular merchandise expected to arrive from Virginia plantations facing financial collapse. The auction records indicate Montgomery's immediate interest in Solomon, noting that the judge examined the subject with unusual thoroughness and engaged in a private discussion with the examining physician before bidding commenced. Most revealing was the transaction ledger showing Montgomery paid $1,800, nearly triple the customary price for skilled laborers, prompting documentation of considerable murmuring and speculation among Tensif assembled buyers, with one notation recording a competitor's comment that the judge must have seen something in this one to warrant such extravagance. Perhaps most disturbing was the medical examination report, prepared for potential buyers, discovered in 1,985 inches, the archived records of Dr. William Harrington, which contained observations far exceeding standard assessments. Subject displays exceptional musculature development, symmetrical proportions unusual in field workers, skin remarkably unblemished despite previous employment, carries himself with uncommon dignity. The report's final notation, underlined twice and marked specifically for Judge Montgomery's attention, reads, "As requested, subject demonstrates remarkable composure under intimate examination, maintains eye contact when instructed, and exhibits precisely the physical characteristics specified in your correspondence. This specimen would indeed satisfy the particular domestic requirements you described." The leather-bound ledger recovered from beneath Thornfield's floorboards contains meticulous entries documenting Solomon's unexpected trajectory following his arrival at the plantation in late November 1833, with the first entry noting simply "Field Assignment, Cotton, South Quarter," before a surprising amendment appears just 17 days later, "Reassignment to house staff effective immediately." This rapid elevation raised no documented suspicions at the time, though household accounts show an unusual expenditure for new attire befitting indoor service, including items typically reserved for the highest-ranking house servants. Fragments of Montgomery's personal diary, recovered from a collapsed wall space during Thornfield's partial demolition in 1972, provide disturbing insight into this transition period, with one entry from December 14th noting, "The new acquisition displays remarkable adaptability. Have begun preliminary testing of his composure through increasingly personal service requirements. Today he assisted with my morning toilet without visible discomfort, his hands steady even during the most intimate ablutions. His reluctant compliance suggests previous discipline, yet his eyes reveal a carefully controlled resistance that I find most stimulating." Subsequent entries document Montgomery's escalating demands, from standing attendance during private correspondence hours to assisting with evening disrobing and bathing, with clinical notations regarding Solomon's admirable restraint when handling my unclothed person. Most revealing are the architectural plans for Thornfield discovered in 1980 among courthouse records, showing that in February 1834, Montgomery commissioned significant modifications to the master suite, including the addition of a small chamber measuring barely 8 by 10 feet, connected to his bedroom by a private door, with no separate corridor access. The accompanying contractor's correspondence inquires whether the usual servant's bell pull system should be installed in the new chamber, to which Montgomery's emphatic response, preserved in his distinctive handwriting, reads, "No communication system necessary or desired. The attendant must remain within voice summons at all hours." County tax assessment records from April 1834 confirm these renovations were completed at considerable expense, with the officially documented purpose listed as "accommodation for personal attendant required for medical reasons," a fabrication contradicted by Montgomery's physician's records, which indicate the judge enjoyed robust health during this period and had never requested or required overnight medical attendance. Archaeological evidence from the 1983 University of Alabama excavation of Thornfield's remains revealed disturbing physical confirmation of the ledger's implications when researchers uncovered fragments of specialized furniture from what had been Montgomery's private chambers, most notably a mahogany bed frame with unusual iron fixtures concealed within its ornately carved posts, and a writing desk with hidden compartments containing what experts identified as restraint implements crafted from fine leather with silver buckles bearing the Montgomery family crest. Analysis by historical furniture specialists determined these items had been custom manufactured by Broadwell and Sons of New Orleans, a firm known for creating bespoke furnishings for wealthy clients with particular requirements not provided by conventional craftsmen. The ledger itself contains a peculiar coding system beginning in May 1834, with entries marked by a distinctive symbol resembling a horizontal figure 8 followed by precise documentation of dates, durations, and cryptic annotations. Session commenced 9:17 p.m., concluded 11:42 p.m. Subject's performance, improving though resistance persists in eyes. Applied method 3 with notable results. These clinical recordings increase in frequency through the summer months, with Montgomery developing an elaborate system of notations that historians and psychologists have since interpreted as documenting escalating psychological and physical domination. Particularly revealing is an invoice dated March 1835 from Thomas Jenkins, a local carpenter known for his discretion among wealthy clients, detailing modifications to Montgomery's bedchamber that include application of felt wadding between wall joists as specified, installation of Persian carpeting to floor and lower wall surfaces, and specialized door mechanisms allowing locking from single side only. The invoice bears a handwritten note, materials selected for their sound dampening qualities as requested. Though I must express reservation about the extreme thickness specified, normal household privacy surely achieved with half such application. Jenkins' personal journal, discovered among his descendants' possessions in 1979, contains a cryptic entry from this same period. Completed the Montgomery Commission. May the Lord forgive my participation, though I dare not refuse a man of his influence. The nature of such preparations troubles my conscience, particularly the restraint fittings disguised as ordinary furnishing embellishments. What man needs such devices in his private quarters if his purposes are godly? The ledger entries from June 1834 through early 1836 reveal Montgomery's methodical implementation of an elaborate behavioral modification system, with pages devoted to documenting what he termed the conditioning process, a disturbing regimen of calculated rewards and severe punishments designed to cultivate Solomon's absolute submission. Entries marked with a distinctive crescent symbol recorded instances of satisfactory compliance, each followed by precisely enumerated privileges, additional food rations, higher quality clothing items, permission to read selected religious texts under supervision, and most notably, small monetary allowances recorded to the penny in a separate accounting section. Estate financial records show Solomon received significantly better accommodations than any other enslaved person at Thornfield, with quarterly inventories listing items in his quarters that would have been unthinkable luxuries for others. A small writing desk, a mirror, personal grooming implements, and even a modest collection of books carefully selected by Montgomery himself. However, these privileges existed in stark contrast to the consequences documented for what Montgomery clinically termed willful resistance or insufficient enthusiasm, with entries marked by a sharp diagonal line, detailing corrective measures administered in the judge's private chambers. Household purchasing records from this period reveal Montgomery's regular correspondence with Lafitte importers of New Orleans, with orders for exotic items shipped to Thornfield in unmarked crates designated for the judge's private collection, including scented oils from North Africa, specialized implements crafted from fine leather and rare woods, and what the shipping manifests discreetly listed as custom restraint devices with silk padding as per enclosed specifications. Most chilling are Montgomery's personal notations regarding these implements, with one entry from September 1835 reading, "The new acquisition from Lafitte proves most effective in generating the desired response. Solomon's resistance diminished significantly after just 2 applications, though the psychological impact appears more profound than the physical. The calculated introduction of pleasure following discomfort creates precisely the dependent state I have theorized." These records demonstrate Montgomery's disturbing application of his judicial mind toward the systematic breaking and reshaping of Solomon's will, a calculated campaign of psychological manipulation, employing both reward and punishment to create an unspeakable form of intimate servitude, disguised behind the already oppressive institution of slavery. The existence of a witness to Montgomery's private depravities emerged during a 1975 renovation of the Wilkins family homestead in neighboring Lawrence County, when a bundle of letters was discovered concealed within a hollow section of wall paneling. Correspondence from Rebecca Wilkins, who served as head housekeeper at Thornfield from 1833 until early 1836. These letters, addressed to her younger sister Martha in Tennessee, document Rebecca's growing unease with peculiar occurrences within the judge's household. beginning with casual observations about the strange attachment the master has developed to the new house servant before progressing to more disturbing accounts. A letter dated July 1835 notes, "The sounds from the judge's quarters have been most troubling these past weeks. Muffled cries and what I can only describe as the rhythmic striking of leather against flesh, though in the morning Solomon bears no visible marks, save for a peculiar emptiness in his eyes that chills me to observe." By November, Rebecca's concerns had intensified. Solomon's demeanor has transformed entirely. He moves through his duties like a man sleepwalking, startling violently when addressed by anyone save the judge, to whom he responds with an unnerving combination of dread and dependence. The final letter in the collection, dated the 17th of February 1836, reveals the circumstances of her dismissal. "I have been terminated from service effective immediately, with no references despite my years of loyal management. Yesterday evening I entered the judge's chambers to deliver an urgent message from the sheriff, having received no response to my knock, only to witness a scene so unnatural and disturbing between the master and Solomon that my mind recoils from its recollection. The judge's fury upon noticing my presence was terrifying. I fear my safety should I commit details to paper. County records confirm that Rebecca Wilkins was discovered dead just 3 weeks later. Her body recovered from the Tennessee River near Decatur, with the official determination of accidental drowning recorded despite the coroner's private notation, uncovered in 2001 archives, indicating suspicious bruising patterns around the neck and wrists inconsistent with typical drowning victims, suggesting restraint prior to water entry. The Limestone County Gazette editions from 1836 through 1839, preserved in the state archives, paint Judge Montgomery as a pillar of antebellum society, with one particularly effusive article from March 1838, praising his generous donation of 30 acres for the construction of a new county orphanage, and his Solomon-like wisdom in adjudicating even the most complex legal disputes with fairness and impartiality. Such public veneration stands in grotesque contrast to the private reality documented in the ledger's increasingly disturbing entries from this same period, which detail elaborate ceremonial humiliations conducted in the judge's chambers with meticulous scheduling and preparation. Pages marked with a distinctive triangular symbol outline what Montgomery termed submission rituals, precisely choreographed scenarios requiring Solomon to participate in acts designed specifically to erode his sense of humanity and autonomy. The ledger methodically records these sessions. Subject required to maintain statue-like immobility for 4 hours while judge conducts business, speaking of him in third person as the property to emphasize his status as object rather than person. And later, subject commanded to recite prepared statements of self-degradation while arranged in poses selected to maximize psychological impact. Most disturbing are entries documenting Montgomery's practice of, quote, identity nullification, forcing Solomon to respond exclusively to dehumanizing designations rather than his name, with rewards granted only when he demonstrated complete psychological surrender to his proper station. A single page torn from Montgomery's personal journal, discovered pressed between ledger pages, reveals the judge's disturbed philosophical justification for these acts. What the common man perceives as cruelty, the enlightened mind recognizes as natural dominion, the necessary hierarchy that gives meaning to civilization itself. The subjugation of the lesser being to the greater represents not perversion but the purest expression of natural law, no different from the governance of planets by celestial forces. In the complete submission of S to my will, I glimpse transcendence beyond ordinary existence, a private realm where absolute authority meets absolute surrender, creating something approaching divinity. The biblical dominion granted to man over beasts extends naturally to these inferior specimens of humanity, making my private pursuits not merely permissible but philosophically essential to maintaining proper order. By late 1839, Montgomery's ledger entries betray growing frustration with what he termed troubling independence of thought. that persisted in Solomon despite years of systematic conditioning. Noting with clinical detachment. Subject continues to exhibit brief moments of autonomous expression through micro-expressions and occasional lapses in properly deferential posture. Most concerning is the persistent light of awareness in his eyes that suggests inner resistance remains unbroken. The judge's response to these subtle defiances was documented with disturbing precision. Implemented enhanced correction protocol involving extended isolation followed by intensified submission exercises, duration 6 hours, with particular attention to breaking eye contact resistance. A remarkable discovery during Thornfield's 1967 renovation revealed that Solomon had maintained a secret inner life throughout his ordeal. Workers removing a damaged wall panel in what had been the servants' quarter, adjacent to Montgomery's chambers, discovered a small cavity containing carefully folded papers pressed between wooden slats. These fragile documents, now preserved in the State Historical Society, contain Solomon's hidden writings, primitive ink crafted from crushed berries mixed with coffee grounds applied to scraps of paper salvaged from the judge's wastebasket. The writings reveal Solomon's desperate psychological struggle, alternating between poetic expressions of spiritual resistance. Though flesh may yield to mortal hand, my spirit stands unbowed, a kingdom built in silent mind, no master can invade, and increasingly, frantic escape plans meticulously drafted and revised with calculations of distances to free territories. Most revealing are entries documenting Solomon's conflicted emotional state, as years of psychological manipulation created a disturbing dependence alongside his desire for freedom. The shame of mourning is that I find myself anticipating his call, hating myself for the trained response my body gives to his presence. I pray for strength against this confusion he has planted within me, where revulsion and need have become so entangled I can no longer distinguish between them. Forensic analysis of the handwriting shows a progressive deterioration over time, with later entries displaying tremulous script and disorganized thinking suggesting severe psychological trauma, culminating in a final entry that reads simply, "I exist in 2 selves now, one that lives to serve him, and one that lives to flee him. If escape proves impossible, I fear which self will ultimately prevail." Medical documentation of Solomon's suffering emerged when county health records from 1840 to 1841 were digitized by the Alabama Medical Historical Society in 1988, revealing 3 separate instances where Dr. James Whitfield treated Solomon for injuries officially attributed to accidents in performance of household duties. The physician's private case notes, maintained separately from official records and discovered among his effects when his granddaughter donated them to the County Historical Society in 1978, tell a disturbing alternative narrative. Patient presents with symmetrical abrasions and inflammation of wrists and ankles consistent with prolonged constraint, alongside unusual contusions across lower back and thighs that suggest systematic application of force rather than accidental injury. Most concerning is the subject's psychological state, characterized by vacant affect and extreme startle response when touched without warning. A subsequent entry dated February 1841 documents Whitfield's growing suspicion. Third visitation for similarly unexplained injuries within 6 months. The pattern suggests deliberate mistreatment rather than carelessness. Have attempted discreet inquiry with patient, but he remains unresponsive to questions regarding origin of injuries, displaying pronounced anxiety when pressed. County correspondence records reveal that Whitfield submitted a formal inquiry to the sheriff's office regarding potential mistreatment of bondsmen at the Thornfield estate, only for the document to be returned with a notation in Judge Montgomery's distinctive handwriting. Inquiry dismissed as without merit, physician cautioned against exceeding appropriate professional boundaries. Within 3 months of this exchange, parish records from neighboring Madison County indicate Whitfield had relocated his practice, with his hastily sold property in Limestone County purchased at significantly below market value by Montgomery's brother-in-law. The most definitive evidence emerged in 1992, when construction of a highway extension through former Thornfield property uncovered human remains in an unmarked grave, identified through dental comparison with medical records as likely belonging to Solomon. Forensic analysis by the state medical examiner documented extensive evidence of long-term physical trauma, including multiple healed fractures of the ribs consistent with blunt force trauma, stress fractures of wrist and ankle bones, indicating habitual restraint, and distinctive patterns of skeletal remodeling along the spine, suggesting years of repeated stress positions. Physical confirmation of the systemic abuse only hinted at in the written record. The ledger entries for 1,842 reveal a marked deterioration in Montgomery's methodical documentation, with previously precise handwriting becoming increasingly erratic and blotched with ink spills, while the content shifts from clinical detachment to disturbing emotional intensity. Subject submission today was transcendent. I require nothing else to sustain my spirit, and later, 14 hours without his presence has produced intolerable agitation, have summoned him though the hour is inappropriate. Court records from this period, preserved in the state judicial archives, document Montgomery's declining professional conduct, with multiple notations from the circuit clerk regarding the judge's unusual tardiness and visible exhaustion during proceedings. Most revealing are transcripts from 3 separate cases involving disputes over enslaved workers, where Montgomery delivered uncharacteristically passionate rulings, emphasizing the absolute authority of masters over their human property and imposing unusually harsh penalties for insubordination that undermines proper hierarchy. A letter discovered among the personal papers of State Senator Clifford Harrington mentions disturbing reports of Judge Montgomery's courtroom behavior, particularly his inappropriate fixation on matters of servitude and discipline, causing concern among the bar. This professional decline parallels the private deterioration documented in correspondence between Montgomery and his brother Edward, a physician in Mobile. With Edward's increasingly alarmed inquiries preserved in the family collection donated to the State Historical Society in 1923. Your prolonged isolation at Thornfield cannot be healthful for a man of your intellectual capacities. Your refusal to accept social invitations or even maintain correspondence with former colleagues suggests a troubling withdrawal from proper society. A subsequent letter dated November 1842 reveals Edward's growing alarm. Your recent communication disturbs me greatly. Elijah, your rambling discourse on dominance and submission as philosophical principles, coupled with oblique references to experiments in human control, suggests a mind increasingly untethered from proper moral constraints. I implore you to consider whether this unusual domestic arrangement with your personal attendant has not developed into an unwholesome obsession that now consumes rather than serves you. The Thornfield Plantation's daily logs, maintained by the overseer and preserved in the county historical archives, document the plantation's first crisis under Montgomery's ownership on the night of the 14th of January, 1843, with a terse entry stating, Solomon absent without permission, search parties dispatched along northern routes. Subsequent entries track the 6-day manhunt through unusually harsh winter conditions, concluding with the notation, subject recovered near Tennessee border by Henderson County slave catchers, reward paid $75, subject returned in weakened condition but without significant injury as per judge's explicit instructions. The ledger entries following Solomon's return reveal Montgomery's methodical approach to what he termed necessary reconditioning with disturbing precision. Phase 1. Complete sensory isolation in the root cellar. Duration 7 days with minimal sustenance to weaken physical resistance while maximizing psychological disorientation. Subsequent phases detail an escalating regimen of crises before day 2. Psychological manipulation, alternating severe punishment with calculated moments of comfort, creating a deliberate pattern of trauma and relief designed to intensify dependence. A letter discovered in the correspondence archives of Dr. William Montgomery in Mobile, dated February 1843, reveals his brother's clinical approach to preventing future escape attempts. I require your professional assistance in securing specialized restraint devices of the type used in your asylum, specifically leather bindings with proper padding to prevent tissue damage during prolonged application, alongside a supply of the sedative tincture you mentioned in our previous discussion. The archaeological excavation of Solomon's quarters in 1994 provided physical confirmation of these measures, uncovering iron anchor points embedded in the floor beneath the rug and concealed within the bed frame, installed after the escape attempt according to dated manufacturer's marks. Most disturbing was the discovery of a hidden compartment within Solomon's writing desk, containing what analysis confirmed to be a primitive suicide implement, fashioned from a sharpened spoon handle, suggesting he had contemplated the ultimate escape even while outwardly submitting to Montgomery's renewed control. The first significant external challenge to Montgomery's private tyranny emerged through a letter dated April 1845, discovered among the personal papers of Reverend Thomas Montgomery, the judge's cousin and a respected Episcopal minister from Virginia, who had visited Thornfield ostensibly to discuss family estate matters. The letter, addressed to his church elder board, but never actually sent, discovered, instead among his personal effects after his death in 1851, reveals his profound distress. I have witnessed something within my cousin's household that has shaken my very faith in human decency, a relationship between Elijah and his personal servant that defies Christian principles and natural law, exhibiting a grotesque perversion of authority that borders on demonic influence. What I observed through the partially open study door last evening has left me sleepless and physically ill, torn between family loyalty and my sacred duty as a man of God. Parish records from St. Matthew's Episcopal Church in Richmond document Reverend Montgomery's subsequent discreet campaign to raise sufficient funds to purchase Solomon's freedom, with church accounting ledgers showing donations collected specifically for the liberation of a soul in particular moral danger. Correspondence between the Reverend and Montgomery reveals the judge's furious response to this intervention, culminating in a letter preserved in the church archives, threatening ruinous legal action against any party attempting to interfere in my private affairs or to separate me from my rightfully owned property. Court records from July 1845 confirm Montgomery initiated preliminary legal proceedings against his own cousin for defamation and intentional infliction of financial harm, with filings specifically prohibiting any contact with Solomon. The ledger entries from this period document Montgomery's escalating paranoia, with one particularly disturbing passage noting, "Household security protocols enhanced. S. No longer permitted interaction with visitors under any circumstances. All correspondence now subject to my personal review. Signs of outside interference require immediate identification and elimination." Multiple entries reference Montgomery's growing obsession with perceived threats, including notations of potential conspirators among his own household staff and detailed accounts of intimidating interrogations conducted to uncover any communication between Solomon and external parties. The ledger entries from late 1844 through 1846 chronicle Montgomery's physical decline alongside his intensifying obsession with maintaining absolute control over Solomon, with increasingly unsteady handwriting documenting the judge's deteriorating health in parallel with his growing psychological dependency. Medical records obtained from Dr. Nathaniel Hargrove's estate in 1990 reveal Montgomery had developed cardiac arrhythmia with episodes of acute distress, with the physician's private notes documenting his futile attempts to moderate the physician. Judge's behavior. Have advised patient to reduce physical exertions and strenuous private activities that precipitate episodes of chest pain and respiratory difficulty. But he dismisses medical counsel with unusual hostility when such recommendations interfere with his household routine, particularly regarding his personal attendant. County records from August 1845 document Montgomery's first revision to his will, with a peculiar codicil stipulating that "My servant Solomon shall under no circumstances be sold, traded, or removed from Thornfield Plantation upon my death." but shall remain perpetually attached to the estate regardless of ownership transfers, effectively ensuring their relationship would continue until one of them died. Subsequent legal filings in February 1846 strengthened these provisions with unusually specific language, preventing even Montgomery's heirs from altering Solomon's status, accompanied by substantial financial penalties for any attempted violation. The ledger entries during this period reveal Montgomery's increasingly desperate fixation on immortalizing their relationship, with one particularly disturbing passage noting, "Have instructed Solomon in precise detail regarding the maintenance of my chambers after my passing. The arrangements shall continue undisturbed, my presence preserved through the rituals he has been conditioned to perform even in my absence." As his physical strength waned, Montgomery's entries document increasingly elaborate efforts to maintain dominance despite his weakening body. With detailed accounts of modified sessions, requiring less physical exertion but intensified psychological control, alongside paranoid speculations about Solomon's thoughts. His eyes betray calculations. He measures my diminishing strength against his prospects for eventual freedom, must reinforce the understanding that death itself cannot release him from my authority. The final pages of the leather-bound ledger betray Montgomery's rapid mental and physical deterioration, with entries from January and February 1846 degenerating into increasingly disjointed ramblings. The once meticulous handwriting now tremulous and occasionally trailing into illegibility mid-sentence. The last coherent entry, dated February 27th, contains a disturbing fragment. "Solomon's eyes today, something changed, watching me with calculation, must reassert, before dissolving into an indecipherable scrawl that trails off the page." The official record of Montgomery's death, filed with the county registrar on March 3rd, 1846, lists the cause as cardiac failure consistent with his documented heart ailment, yet several elements surrounding his demise raised questions that remain unresolved nearly 2 centuries later. The death certificate, signed by Dr. Hargrove, notes the judge was discovered deceased in his bedchamber by household staff, but includes a peculiar addendum. Body positioned with unusual formality, hands folded across chest in manner inconsistent with natural repose following sudden cardiac episode. Witness statements collected by the county sheriff contain troubling inconsistencies, with the housekeeper reporting, "The chambers were immaculate, bed linens fresh and unwrinkled despite the body being found upon them," while the groundskeeper noted peculiar arrangements of personal items on bedside tables, positioned with unnatural precision. Most significant was the testimony of Montgomery's valet, not Solomon, but another household servant, who reported, "Solomon was the last person with the master, summoned to his chambers shortly after dinner. He emerged some hours later, moving with unusual deliberation, and informed me the judge was not to be disturbed until morning." No investigation followed these irregularities, as the county's interim judicial authority, Montgomery's former clerk, determined no evidence suggested foul play, explicitly rejecting a request for post-mortem examination proposed by the judge's brother. The chamber in which Montgomery died was reportedly undisturbed for several weeks following his burial, with household staff noting that Solomon was observed entering the room daily at precise times, though what occurred during these visits remains a matter of historical speculation. Probate records following Montgomery's death reveal a disturbing legal manipulation orchestrated by his executor and cousin, William Montgomery, who deliberately concealed a codicil in the judge's will, providing for Solomon's manumission, upon completion of specific memorial duties for a period not exceeding 6 months following my interment. Instead, plantation accounting records document Solomon's continued presence at Thornfield throughout 1846 and into 1847, with his status unchanged, despite the legally binding provisions for his freedom, a flagrant violation that went unchallenged, as William systematically dismantled the estate's assets. The final documented reference to Solomon appears in a sale inventory dated January 1848, listing him as transferred to Harrison Plantation, Mississippi Territory, despite such transfer being explicitly forbidden in Montgomery's will, suggesting a deliberate attempt to eliminate witnesses to the judge's private depravities. Solomon subsequently vanishes from historical records, his ultimate fate unknown until the remarkable series of discoveries beginning in 1967, when renovation workers uncovered the leather-bound ledger that would initiate a decades-long historical investigation. Subsequent archaeological excavations between 1983 and 1994 gradually unearthed physical evidence, confirming the ledger's disturbing accounts, the specialized furniture, the modified architecture, the restraint points, and ultimately Solomon's remains, allowing researchers to reconstruct this haunting narrative of power, perversion, and psychological manipulation hidden beneath the veneer of antebellum gentility. Modern psychological analysis of Montgomery's writings by forensic psychiatrists at Emory University in 2002 identified clear patterns consistent with sexual sadism and narcissistic personality disorder, with one study noting, "The judge's systematic documentation reveals classic manifestations of sadistic pathology, the meticulous record-keeping itself serving as an extension of his control and a means of reliving his domination." The Thornfield case, though exceptionally well documented due to Montgomery's compulsive record-keeping, raises profound questions about how many similar stories of intimate exploitation remain buried within plantation histories across the South. Hidden narratives of power and perversion enacted within a system that already sanctioned absolute control of human beings, creating perfect environments for predators with the social status to ensure their private depravities remained shielded from historical memory.